Hey, good morning. It's great. It's great to see everybody here and at home. Welcome to First Parish Unitarian Universalist of Chelmsford. We're a covenantal community gathered for worship, mutual care, faith formation through spiritual learning and ethical discernment, and in service to the common good. I extend a special welcome to anyone visiting us for the first time, whether you are in the sanctuary or at home. We are glad that you joined us today, and you can learn more about First Parish or contact us via our website, uuchelmsford.org, or email dre@uuchelmsford.org. I'm Reverend Ellen Spiro, and I'm leading our service today with Amy Hughes, who will lead our chalice lighting and our covenant in English, and Brenda Rogers will in Spanish. Maura Snow is our greeter, Doug Snow and Dave Seltz are our ushers, and Diana Cohen is running our live stream tech today. And we're very delighted to have Jeffrey Dagiro Taylor as our guest musician today. Jeffrey grew up here, yes, excellent. Jeffrey grew up here and in this congregation, and was a common sight, a stalwart in First Parish's carol choir all the way up through their intermediate choir, and I imagine you also occasionally appeared in the senior choir too, like on Christmas Eve. In college, Jeffrey went on to study music composition at Ithaca's college's School of Music, where he had the opportunity to write pieces while continuing lessons as a pianist. And after graduating in May of 2021, he has gone on to work as a professional soundtrack composer, which sounds really exciting. So we'll listen for you in movies and things. Anyway, it's a delight to have you here with us. Thank you. A reminder that our worship services are multi-platform, with people attending here in the sanctuary again and from home. If you're attending from home, Bill Newhart is our online chat host today. And if you wish to join the online chat, you need to join the worship service via the YouTube link option on our website and be logged into your Google account. If you're attending in the sanctuary, be aware that the service is being live streamed and recorded to post on our website later. And Doug and Dave, our ushers, can help you find seating that is not within view of the camera. However, if you are joining us, we're glad you're here from wherever you happen to be. And I'd like to take a moment for those of us here in the sanctuary to wave and say hello to those of us at home. And those at home, you can wave, and we are seeing you do that. So good morning, everybody. I have a brief announcement. Lent begins this Wednesday, March 2nd, and I'm offering an online Lenten retreat, a weekly contemplations and reflection questions from using a piece by Jan Richardson called A Path Called Solace. It's a practice that you do on your own. We don't meet, but there's an online discussion forum where people can post their reflections and share comments if they wish. What's fun about this is that we'll actually be joined by people from First Parish of Grattan and from North Parish in North Andover, including the ministers Aaliyah Kemmler and Lee Blumel. So this is an experiment. We'll see how it goes. If you're interested, just email me, minister@uuchelmsford.org. We will have social hour online after the service today, hosted by Terry Rubovsky, and we'll provide the Zoom link at the end. And for those of you who wish to gather in the vestry for socializing after the service, you are most welcome to do so, but we're just not serving coffee or tea yet. We'll get there, hopefully. But now I'd like to invite us to center ourselves with worship. Jeffrey.
Good morning. I'm Amy Hughes, and I am the chair of the worship committee. I want to read you a poem. It's called A Poem About Creating an Inclusive World, and it's by Ryan Lee, and it's from the Autism Speaks website. Everyone in this world is different, react differently to smell, taste, and sound. We are all unique. It's what makes the world go around. Still, some are very particular of who they invite into their group. When someone messes up the first time, they really get thrown for a loop. First impressions can be hard. There's more than meets the eye. Nobody is perfect at them, and yet neither am I. Even if they're loud or excited, it's not like they committed a crime. They want to make some friends and have fun, still give it some time. We don't want to wear a mask, even if others expect us to satisfy. It's hard to be yourself when expectations are really high. Try to work with them, regardless of what others complain or say. Offer a helping hand. It can really go a long way. Never judge someone on the outside. Still give them the opportunity. They still might need a friend. We're building an inclusive community. Almost 3 years ago, my younger son, Aiden, was diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum. This after many years of feeling that something was just a little off with him. He didn't respond or seem to understand common social cues and reacted to situations in unpredictable ways. His diagnosis was both a relief and worrisome at the same time. Knowing the why was a tool in my pocket that I could work with, and we set about getting him services. However, there were other aspects to think about because, as we know, people, often children, can be unkind. Aiden had a small circle of friends from the start of elementary school, and we talked about whether or not to tell them about his diagnosis. The wonderful and amazing thing was that Aiden wasn't embarrassed or ashamed about being on the spectrum, and he was all for sharing his diagnosis with them. We decided that we would tell his friends' parents, and that if the kids had questions after, they would come to us. Our Soul Matters theme for February is widening our circle. To me, that means including others by bringing them into our world, our lives, our circle. I know Autism Awareness Month isn't until April, but when I was looking for a poem to read about inclusivity, this one came up, and it spoke to me as I thought about how Aiden's friends reacted to his news. And that was the kicker. They pretty much didn't react. Almost all of them said, "Yeah, we knew there was something going on, but just chalked it up to you being you." That made my heart so happy, because even though he was different and can be very annoying and hard to be friends with, they never stopped including him or accepting him for who he was. I light the chalice today with love for all those who are working to create a world that sees beyond a label or a diagnosis and sees the inherent worth and dignity of all people, no matter what their ability. He also get me for the chalice lighting. The covenant. Please join me in reading our first parish covenant. We, the members of First Parish of Chelmsford, covenant together to sustain and strengthen our beloved community by honoring and celebrating the spirit of life, nurturing all souls in our search for truth and the sacred, caring and being present to one another in our joys and sorrows, bearing witness through service to justice and peace, and being good stewards of our congregation, our heritage, our Unitarian Universalist principles, and our earth.
Buenos días. Nosotros, los miembros de la primera parroquia de Chelmsford, Convenimos juntos a sostener y fortalecer nuestra amada comunidad en honrando y celebrando el espíritu de la vida, nutriendo todas almas en búsqueda de la verdad y lo sagrado. Cuidar y estar presentes al uno y otro en nuestras alegrías y tristezas. Dar testimonio mediante servicio a la justicia y paz. Y ser buenos cuidadores de nuestra congregación, nuestra herencia, nuestros principios unitarios universalistas y nuestra tierra.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Brenda. As we pause for our offertory, we're still not going to pass the plate yet. And I've been asking us to use this time to consider gratitudes that we may have. So if you wish to make a donation, if you're in the sanctuary, our plate is out front. You can do so on your way out. Some of you already have, and thank you. If you're at home or after you leave the service here, you can always donate through our website. This morning, I would like to offer my gratitude and thanks to our welcoming congregation team, who make sure that we keep our covenant and our commitment, our widening of the circle for our LGBTQIA+ friends and families and siblings, whether within our congregation or in our larger community, because as we know, civil rights are being challenged on every front. It's always a tug of war and will always be. And so that they help us sustain this commitment, I am truly grateful. We will now let Jeffrey, I'm also grateful for your music and enjoy listening to you again. Thank you, Chopin. So both Steve and Dolores are off today, so Jeffrey can do the music, but I'll do the For All Ages. And I wanted to use one of the parables of Jesus. So this is from the Christian tradition. And Jesus was a beloved rabbi and teacher who believed that God loved all people, not just the rich and the powerful. And during his lifetime, people followed him everywhere, huge crowds, and hung on his every word. And many of the folks who followed him were outcasts in some way. Maybe they were poor. Maybe they were challenged with a physical or mental illness or condition. Maybe they were foreign. Maybe they were female, or female and widowed. Or maybe they were just lonely. And Jesus used parables, very short stories, to compare things, compare one thing to another. And he used parables to teach his followers about the way that he believed God wanted us to treat each other and to treat the world and to call us into shalom, the reign of shalom, or the reign of God, which gets translated, shalom gets translated as peace, but it means more than that. It also means wholeness. So I wanted to share one of those parables today. It's found in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 13, and it's called The Parable of the Sower. So it has to do with seeds. So Jesus went out of his house and sat beside the sea, and there was such a great crowd gathered around him that he had to get out into a boat and sat out there while the whole crowd stood on the beach waiting for him to speak. And he told them many, many things in parables, and this is one of them. Listen, he said, a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seeds fell on the path, and the birds came and ate them up. Other seeds fell on rocky ground, and they did not have so much soil, and they sprang up quickly, but because they had no depth, when the sun rose, they were scorched and had no root, and they withered away. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew and choked them. And other seeds fell on good soil and brought forth grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. Let anyone with ears listen. So here's my question. What do you think Jesus was trying to teach in this story? Who or what do the seeds represent? And the different types of soil. There are many different ways to interpret this, and people have been at it trying to interpret the story for over 2,000 years. So what I hear is that we can't always know whether or not words of love, the spirit of love, will be heard or accepted, but we speak it, we practice it anyway, because we never know where it will grow. We can only plant the seeds. I'd like to offer our ancient reading this morning from the Tao Te Ching, chapter 15, as translated by Stephen Mitchell. The ancient masters were profound and subtle. Their wisdom was unfathomable. There's not a way to describe it. All we can do is describe their appearance. They were careful as someone crossing an iced-over stream, alert as a warrior in enemy territory, courteous as a guest, fluid as melting ice, shapeable as a block of wood, receptive as a valley, clear as a glass of water. Do you have the patience to wait till your mud settles and the water is clear? Can you remain unmoving till the right action arises by itself? The master does not seek fulfillment, not seeking, not expecting. She is present and can welcome all things. Our modern reading is from a poem by May Sarton entitled The Invocation to Kali, from A Grain of Mustard Seed. It's time for the invocation. Kali, be with us. Violence, destruction, receive our homage. Help us to bring darkness into the light, to lift out the pain, the anger, where it can be seen for what it is. The balance wheel for our vulnerable, aching love. Put the wild hunger where it belongs within the act of creation. Crude power that forges a balance between hate and love. Help us to be the always hopeful gardeners of the Spirit, who know that without darkness nothing comes to birth, as without light nothing flowers. Bear the roots in mind, you the dark one, Kali, awesome power. This liminal time that we are living in feels like it's getting more and more liminal by the minute. As if COVID wasn't enough, as if the political divisions and discord in our country weren't enough. We're watching the governors of Florida and Texas try to erase the humanity of our LGBTQIA brothers, sisters, and siblings, to twist the care and support for them into abuse and criminality. We're watching the horrors of violence and war unfold in Ukraine, just as we did with Afghanistan in August, as is happening all over the world in places we don't even know or pay attention to. As the wild weather warns us that the climate is disrupted and disrupting, 70 degrees Wednesday, a snowstorm Friday, even by New England standards, this level of weather whiplash is unusual. Just a reminder, liminal means an in-between time. As Susan Beaumont describes it, during liminal seasons, we occupy space on both sides of a boundary or threshold. We have one foot rooted in something that is not yet over, while the other foot is planted in a thing not yet defined, something not yet ready to begin. We function with structures, identities, and relationships formed by our old experiences, although we know that those structures and processes will not serve us adequately in our present reality or in the future. Liminality is more than new people in new roles or organizations going through transition. Liminality can describe the state of an individual, a place, an organization, or an entire institution evolving. In fact, liminality can describe the disorientation of an entire era of civilization. And Beaumont says that traversing a liminal season requires a different set of questions and practices to guide us. The first set have to do with exploring what we have lost, both positive and negative. The second set of questions asks us to examine the unstated assumptions that have guided our congregation or our country or wherever until now, and to discern which ones still serve us and which ones do not. And her last set of questions asks us to imagine what wants to emerge, to think about what is growing beneath the surface that we cannot yet see. Early in the COVID pandemic, I preached a couple times mainly on the first two sets of questions as we dealt with losses left and right, and as we moved to make decisions about how to proceed, grounding them mindfully and hopefully in our covenant and our mission. How do we gather for worship, mutual care, faith formation, and service to the common good in this time? Now, as we leave February and enter March, ending our second year and entering our third year in this pandemic, as we move from snow to mud, as the pandemic shifts from pandemic to endemic, it's time to start asking what might be emerging, and which of these seeds do we want to nurture and bring to flower or fruit? Because not all seeds produce what we need on this new terrain. In preparing for this sermon, I thought about that May Sarton poem because it's a reading in our hymnal, part of it, 691. Help us to be the always hopeful gardeners of the Spirit, who know that without darkness nothing comes to birth, as without light, nothing flowers. I was curious about the rest of that poem and went exploring, and as you heard, is from a much longer piece entitled Invocation to Kali, and is heavier in tone than the excerpt in our hymnal might suggest. Kali is the Hindu goddess of many things, of time and death and change, of destruction, chaos, and creation, the source of the cosmic energy of the universe, the mother who creates all life and destroys evil. She embodies the paradox that life emerges out of death and decay, that the energy of creation, evolution, and meaningful change emerges out of chaos, destruction, and endings. In other words, she's not a sweet, gentle goddess. She's fierce and she's wild. She's also necessary. She's the goddess of liminality. May Sarton wrote her poem at another liminal time in this country, during the protests of the civil rights movement and the feminist movement and against the Vietnam War. An immigrant, a lesbian, and a Unitarian Universalist who grew up in the shadow of 2 world wars, Sarton knew a great deal about having to make a life in between the prejudices of her time and the radical changes that were being called for. She knew what was required and what it cost. The fact that our hymnal does not include the hard and uncomfortable parts of the poem got me thinking that we don't like being confronted with the hard and the uncomfortable, with the not knowing, the not being in control, the not being able to fix things. It's human nature. Who wants to be scared, anxious, overwhelmed, and at the mercy of forces we don't understand and can't control? Particularly in our tradition, which has emphasized for so long the progress and triumphs and accomplishments of the human spirit. This is why liminal times are so hard, and why often the first reaction is to get back to normal, i.e., the way things were before, as quickly as possible. And when that doesn't happen, because it can't, it's why people get reactive, depressed, angry, and even violent and hateful. Liminal times are full of losses, real ones. People have died of COVID. People's physical and mental health have been compromised. People have lost their housing, their jobs, their connections, their communities. They've had their learning and their careers disrupted. The ties that bind us, one another in real community, have become more frayed and torn than ever before, even before the pandemic. Like any crisis, the pandemic has laid bare hidden fissures, cracks, and broken places. But if we're mindful, it can also reveal what matters most to us, what we hold dear, and what we're willing to sacrifice for. Many people have reassessed their careers, their purpose, and how they want to live saner, more meaningful lives. That is as true for us at First Parish as anywhere. The first year of this pandemic, when we were all at home and there was no vaccine, and we didn't really know about this virus, our online worship was a weekly anchor, a touchstone for many people. In the second year, though, I think it got more complicated. As many of us returned to in-person work and life, those who could or were required to, the fissures and cracks were felt more deeply. Some people have drifted away, no longer needing a weekly touchstone as more opportunities for interaction and for busyness have come back. Meanwhile, some of our pre-pandemic activities, programs, committees, and groups have shrunk down or disappeared altogether. As we try to keep ourselves connected, we haven't really figured out how to welcome and integrate new people into the congregation. Not being in the building together has worn away at some of the bindings, not irreparably. We will be able to strengthen them again, but we are not going back to the way we did things before, the way that we were before. Because new things are emerging, which is scary and exciting. Some of our programs and committees and groups have adapted to the realities of COVID, while new ones have emerged as we find ourselves in need of new skills or ways of doing church. For example, live streaming our worship services has made us much more accessible, enlarged our welcome. People can and do attend our services who can't come into the building for a lot of reasons, including not even living in this state. And others just find it much more convenient to be able to watch from home. We are learning to use new technologies and to offer ways to connect online in the building and at home at the same time. It's bumpy, it's imperfect, because we're still learning, but we are learning. And this is one of the changes that has emerged, and we will not go back to in-sanctuary worship only. We will be a multi-platform worshiping congregation going forward, COVID or no COVID. So there are many questions to consider as we emerge from this pandemic time. What does it mean to belong? What does it mean to belong to this community if being in the same physical space is no longer required? What does membership mean in this context? What does worship mean? What does faith formation mean? What does community mean? Are there things that we need to shift with regard to our systems and our structures to meet the spiritual and pastoral needs of individual members and friends and the congregation as a whole? How do we attend to the longings that bring people here? And how do we bind ourselves to walk together in covenant in the spirit of truth and love as it is revealed and calling upon us today? There's a lot of anxiety flying around. And anxiety causes reactivity, a rush to fix things without really thinking things through, or to try to force things to go back to the way that they were before. While it is tempting to react to every crack, fissure, problem, or issue we encounter in order to get back to normal, Susan Beaumont advises us to practice discernment instead as we encounter and welcome what wants to emerge. So we're going to need to update our understanding of church time. On the one hand, we need to be shapeable, receptive, and fluid, to adapt with greater ease to the rapid pace of change around us. At the same time, we need to do so thoughtfully, carefully, grounded in our covenant, our ethics, our faith. As the Tao says, to have the patience to wait till our mud settles and the water's clear. A couple of Sundays ago, I talked about religious community as being a community of long-haul people, people who understood themselves to be part of something larger than themselves, grounded in the ethics, values, and faith that transcends generations. We are not the owners, nor the consumers here. Unlike most things in this world, ours is not an on-demand enterprise. Rather, we are stewards of a covenantal tradition handed down from our ancestors. And if we do our part well, one that we will hand down when we become ancestors. My colleague, the Reverend Jake Morrill, wrote this in his weekly newsletter, Tenacious Play. In his final soliloquy in the musical Hamilton, Alexander Hamilton reflects, what is a legacy? It's planting seeds in a garden you never get to see. Often people assess their efforts in terms of results, Did they win? Did they achieve? Did they get the reward? All of that can be helpful over the course of a week or a month, and it does help to have meaningful metrics, lest a person end up fooling only themselves. But there is some work that won't bear fruit soon. Work that is important and can only be done in light of one's convictions, not in the hope for short-term gain. If you can live by conviction, by what you believe to be true, if you can organize your behaviors around those convictions, then immediate results begin to matter less, and a legacy begins to become more possible. Being a good ancestor is a good way to have lived. So as we emerge out of this stage of the pandemic to whatever is next, as we face this growing of humanity's inhumanity to each other and to the creation, whether it be in Ukraine or Texas or someplace closer to home, let's respond not out of reactivity but discernment. Let's be flexible, shapeable, receptive, patient, generous, and daring to. It's time for the invocation. Kali, be with us. Violence, destruction, receive our homage. Help us to bring darkness into the light, to lift out the pain and anger where it can be seen for what it is. The balance wheel for our vulnerable, aching love. Put the wild hunger where it belongs within the act of creation, crude power that forges a balance between hate and love. Help us to be the always hopeful gardeners of the Spirit who know that without darkness, nothing comes to birth. As without light, nothing flowers. Jeffrey. As we say in our covenant, we promise to be present to one another in our joys and sorrows as well as the joys and sorrows of the world. I'm going to start with some big joys this morning. Diana Cohane would like to share that her and Ron's son Jason, who grew up in this church, married Caroline Forrest at the Portland, Maine City Hall on Wednesday, which was a beautiful sunny day and a palindrome date, 2/23/22. She writes that she and Ron were their witnesses and brought Diana's mom as well, and that This was a long time coming, as Jason and Caroline had to cancel their original July 2021 wedding plans due to COVID. Congratulations, Diana. And along similar lines, Beth Benoit is thrilled to announce that Ethan Russell Benoit and Dora Lowe are engaged to be married. No details yet on when and where the wedding will be, especially since the quarantine requirements for Hong Kong, where Dora's family lives, are still pretty onerous. It's good to know that joy keeps happening. It's also a hard time. And there's a rabbinic story that I've shared before about how, as long as there are 10 just persons living on the earth, it will survive. And Paul Farmer, the founder of Partners in Health, passed away last week. And he's one of my heroes, and I believe one of those 10 just persons, and the world will miss him. And of course, we know that there is a war happening. It's in the news a lot. And while for many of us it just may be on television, for others of us there are close ties, I know. And Sally Seekings would like us to keep her niece and her niece's husband in our thoughts and prayers. They are in Germany, and her niece's husband is a member of the German army, and it's a really difficult time there. And just for all of the people who are under fire and in war zones, not just in Ukraine, but around the world, I'd like to invite us into a time of meditation and prayer. As you call forth and call out to your source of being, however you know and name your source, whether within, among, or a spirit, divine spirit beyond, as I offer this blessing by Jan Richardson. Blessing in a time of violence, which is to say this blessing is always, which is to say there is no place this blessing does not long to cry out in lament, to weep its words in sorrow, to scream its lines in sacred rage. Which is to say there is no day this blessing ceases to whisper in the ear of the dying, the despairing, the terrified. Which is to say there is no moment this blessing refuses to sing itself into the heart of the hated and the hateful, the victim and the victimizer, with every last ounce of hope it has. Which is to say there is none that can stop it, none that can halt its course, none that will still its cadence, none that will delay its rising, none that can keep it from springing forth from the mouths of us who hope, from the hands of us who act, from the hearts of us who love, from the feet of us who will not cease our stubborn, aching, marching, until this blessing has spoken its final word, until this blessing has breathed its benediction in every place, on every tongue. Peace. 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 Amen, and blessed be.
Alleluia,
Oh, thank you for gathering here this morning, however you have, in body and in spirit. May the truth that sets us free, and the hope that never dies, and the love that casts out fear be with us now until the day spring breaks and the shadows flee away.